The Galactic Council's laughter echoed through the crystalline halls of Station Zenith, their varied alien voices creating a cacophony of derision that made Ambassador Sarah Chen's jaw clench. The holographic display showed Earth's pathetic military statistics compared to the rest of the galaxy. Primitive chemical rockets, kinetic weapons that barely scratched modern shields, and a population that had only just figured out how to leave their own solar system. "Humans!" wheezed High Counselor Vexitar through his breathing apparatus, his cephalopod-like tentacles writhing with amusement. "You wish to join our defensive alliance against the Devourers. What could your species possibly contribute to a war effort that has seen civilizations with million-year head starts struggle and fall?" The Zephyrian delegate's crystalline form chimed like broken glass as it spoke. "Their ships move at barely 10% light speed. Their weapons systems are quaint. Perhaps they could serve as emergency rations for our troops?" More laughter. Sarah kept her expression neutral, though her knuckles were white where she gripped the podium. Behind her, the other human delegates shifted uncomfortably. They'd traveled 18 months through hyperspace just to be humiliated by beings who saw Earth as nothing more than a curious backwater. "We understand your concerns," Sarah said once the laughter died down. "But humanity has something you might find interesting. We'd like to propose a demonstration." "A demonstration?" The Corvin representative's insectoid head tilted, compound eyes glittering. "Of what? How to throw rocks really hard?" "Of our engineering philosophy," Sarah replied calmly. "Give us 6 months and access to your materials databases. If we can't prove our worth by then, we'll withdraw our application and leave you to face the Devourers alone." The Council exchanged glances, some skeptical, others amused. The Devourers had been systematically consuming worlds on the galaxy's rim for 3 years now, their biomechanical ships adapting to every defensive strategy the allied races could devise. What harm could there be in letting the humans embarrass themselves further? "Agreed," Vexitar declared. 6 months. Try not to hurt yourselves." Captain Marcus Webb had seen some crazy assignments in his 20 years of military service, but this topped them all. Standing in the retrofitted asteroid mining facility that served as humanity's temporary base, he watched as civilian engineers, military personnel, and scientists worked around the clock on what could only be described as organized chaos. "Sir," called out Dr. Elena Vasquez, her hair a mess from 3 days without sleep. "The quantum entanglement arrays are stable. We're ready for the field test." Marcus nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure he understood what they'd built. The device in the center of the facility looked like nothing he'd ever seen. Part particle accelerator, part quantum computer, part something that belonged in a fever dream. The engineers called it Project Sledgehammer, and apparently it was going to change everything. Lieutenant Commander Raj Patel jogged up, tablet in hand. "Latest intelligence from the front lines, sir. The Corvin 3rd Fleet engaged a Devourer scout group yesterday. Standard outcome, the Devourers adapted to their weapons within hours and wiped out 60 ships. That was the problem everyone faced. The Devourers didn't just have superior technology, they had adaptive technology. Their ships learned from every attack, evolved countermeasures in real time, and shared that knowledge across their entire fleet through some kind of bio-neural network. What worked once never worked twice, which was exactly why the humans had stopped trying to build better weapons." "How's the fabrication coming along?" Marcus asked. "Ahead of schedule," Elena grinned. "Turns out when you're not trying to build the most advanced thing possible, but rather the most disposable thing possible, engineering becomes a lot simpler. The Devourer fleet emerged from hyperspace like a plague of locusts, their bioships pulsing with organic light as they moved toward the Tarion system. Intelligence suggested this was a scouting force, only 50 ships, but that was enough to sterilize 3 planets and consume their resources. The defending fleet was a joint force, Zephyrian crystal ships, Corvan insectoid designs, and various other allied vessels. At the rear, almost as an afterthought, sat 12 human vessels that looked like they'd been cobbled together from scrap metal. Admiral Thexara of the Zephyrian fleet opened communications. Human vessels, maintain rear position. Try not to interfere with actual military operations. Captain Webb's voice crackled back, tinged with what sounded like amusement. Copy that, Admiral. We'll try to stay out of your way. The battle began as all battles with Devourers did, with the Allied forces unleashing their most powerful weapons while the enemy ships studied, adapted, and evolved. Plasma cannons that had worked last month suddenly became ineffective. Quantum torpedoes that had been developed just weeks ago found their targets sprouting new armor configurations. Within an hour, 30 Allied ships had been destroyed. The Devourers pressed forward, their adaptation cycles complete. Human fleet. Admiral Thexara broadcast desperately. If you have any tricks, now would be the time. Acknowledged, Admiral. Beginning Operation Sledgehammer. What happened next defied every tactical manual in the galaxy. The human ships didn't fire energy weapons or launch sophisticated missiles. Instead, they began launching junk. Actual, literal junk. Chunks of scrap metal accelerated to near-light speed by crude magnetic rail systems, containers full of ball bearings and industrial waste, old chemical explosive devices that looked like they belonged in a museum. The projectiles were so primitive, so unsophisticated, that the Devourer ship's adaptation systems couldn't figure out what they were supposed to adapt to. How do you evolve a defense against a chunk of iron moving at 30% light speed? How do you adapt to explosives that work on principles so basic they might as well be rocks and fire? What is this? Admiral Thexara gasped as Devourer. Ships began taking critical damage from weapons that belonged in the Galactic Stone Age. Redundancy, Admiral, Webb replied. Every weapon system we've built is completely different. Different firing mechanisms, different projectile compositions, different explosive types. Even if their ships adapt to one system, we've got 50 more that work on entirely different principles. And they're all cheap enough that we can afford to throw them away. A Devourer heavy cruiser, its bio-hull adapted to deflect every form of energy weapon in the galaxy, cracked open like an egg when hit by a rail-launched shipping container full of industrial diamonds and titanium scraps. But this is. The Corvan delegate's voice joined the communication channel. This is crude, primitive, inelegant. Yeah, Webb agreed cheerfully, as another human ship launched what appeared to be an actual kitchen sink, accelerated to relativistic speeds. But it works. And more importantly, it works differently every time. The Galactic Council chamber was silent, except for the soft humming of life support systems. Before them, the holographic display showed the aftermath of the battle. 53 Devourer ships destroyed, 0 human casualties, and Allied losses cut to a fraction of what they'd been in previous engagements. The concept is simple, Ambassador Chen explained to the stunned assembly. Every other species in the galaxy tries to build the perfect weapon. You optimize, you refine, you create elegant solutions. And that's exactly what the Devourers exploit. They study your perfect weapons and find perfect countermeasures. She gestured to the tactical display. Humans don't do elegant. We do messy, redundant, and aggressively stupid. We built 17 different kinds of railguns, 43 varieties of chemical explosives, and 67 types of kinetic projectiles, each one barely worthy of being called technology. But that's the point. There's nothing sophisticated enough to adapt to. High Counselor Vextar's tentacles had stopped their amused writhing. You're saying you won by being more primitive? We won by understanding that sometimes the best solution isn't the most advanced one, Sarah replied. Every human engineer knows the maxim. If brute force isn't working, you're not using enough of it. The Zephyrian delegate's crystalline form flickered. But surely this tactic has limitations. The Devourers will eventually adapt? Sure, probably. So we'll switch to something even more ridiculous. Maybe crossbows, or catapults, or just ramming them with ships full of concrete. Sarah smiled. The beautiful thing about being primitive is that there's always room to get more primitive. The silence stretched until the Corvin representative clicked his mandibles uncertainly. You're proposing to fight a galaxy-spanning technological horror with increasingly obsolete weapons? We're proposing to fight them with the one thing they can't predict or counter, Chen said. Human stubbornness, and really, really stupid engineering. Vexitar looked around the chamber, then back at the humans. When can you begin mass production?